Stream 2 on day 2 has reconvened, and we are about to hear from Ravensdown Limited in support of its submission. We have Carmen Taylor and Anna Wilkes, both of whom have pre-circulated evidence before us, which we have read. You can hear us all right?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Well, the floor is all yours, so please do talk to your submission.
Thank you very much. I'll open. Commissioners, good morning. I'm Anna Wilkes, Ravensdown's Chief Environment and Sustainability Officer. And the only matter we wish to traverse this morning is in relation to the volumes of earthworks that are permitted on industrial sites. And so I will swiftly defer to Ms Taylor, who is going to speak more broadly to that in her evidence.
Thank you.
Me now, all right. Carmen Taylor, I'm a planner who assists Ravensdown with their policy work. As Anna has just said, in terms of the matters that are the subject of this hearing, the only outstanding matter is the permitted earthworks volumes in industrial zones. We're comfortable with the recommendations of the Section 40A reports in relation to all other matters we submitted on. I'm now at, the key point is outlined in paragraph D on my summary on page S1. In relation to the permitted activity volumes contained in rules EWR1 and the standard EWS1, for reasons outlined in section 3 of my evidence, where I traverse the matter more fully, I consider that the limits that apply to industrial zones should be increased to 500 cubic metres per hectare per site, rather than the current 50 or 100, depending on the rule. This increase will provide for the nature of large-scale development works and thus earthworks that can take place on large industrial sites, with the per hectare criteria allowing the permitted volume to be appropriately scaled to the size of the site. And the 500 cubic metres requested limit is consistent with the permitted volume of contaminated soil disturbance provided for in Regulation 8.3 of the NES for contaminated soils, where that permitted activity volume, subject to complying with other conditions in the regulation, is 25 cubic metres per 500 metres squared. So that's the overview. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Me, no, thank you. It's all straightforward.
Thank you. I think the summary was really good. Just in regards to that 500 square metres, we have heard sort of some other evidence around a different number. Are you able just to talk me through where you've got to that number from? Have we pulled that from similar zones and other district plans, or? Yeah, interested in your thinking around that conflicting evidence we do have.
So originally in Ravensdown's submission, we proposed 2,500 cubic metres as a permitted limit, and that was based on the time at a review of a number of plans, and that number was actually, as I say later in my evidence, the district level permitted volume limit in the Auckland Unitary Plan, and I provided a link for that. There's a lot of variability between district plans. The reason I've since come back to the 500 cubic metres is I realise that not all sites are as big as the Napier Works, number one, so it has to work across the city, and it's purely based on the NES for contaminated soils. If it's okay to disturb 500 cubic metres per hectare of contaminated soils as a permitted activity, subject to compliance with the other conditions that apply, then general earthworks should be okay too.
Great, thank you, that's helpful.
Okay, thank you, and that was the same question I had too. So thank you very much for answering that and for attending this morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do we have Forest and Bird online? We do? Ooh.
Yes.
All right.
Can everyone hear me all right?
Hello, Dr. Pidger. We've got your pre-circulated presentation received yesterday, so basically I'm more than happy for you to talk through it because I haven't had a real chance to look at it yet. So if you wouldn't mind just talking through it and answering some questions, that'd be great.
All right. Tihe Māori ora, te wharu I tēnei tēnā koe, te papa I waho tēnā koe, rauranga tira mā tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Chantal Pagel tōku ingoa, no tia mana o ko tipuna, he kaima e hau mō te reo o te taiao. My name is Chantal Pagel. I represent Forest and Bird in 8 regional branches as Conservation Manager for Hawke's Bay, East Cape and the Bay of Plenty. I hold qualifications in environmental science, international nature conservation, as well as nature-based tourism, and I lead Forest and Birds campaign on protecting Indigenous biodiversity under Te Mana Te Taiao, the Aotearoa New Zealand Biodiversity Strategy. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of Forest and Bird and our local branch in relation to our submissions and further submission on the proposed district plan, specifically to the subdivisions chapter, general district-wide matters, and natural environmental values. We commend the Council on its dedicated principle to strive for environmental excellence. We also consider that the need for preservation, protection, enhancement, and improvement of remaining Indigenous biodiversity is only increasing in the current context of a biodiversity and climate crisis, and it's of utmost importance that this is adequately reflected in the proposed district plan. For this reason, Forest and Bird are concerned about the absence of the ecosystem and Indigenous biodiversity chapter in the proposed plan, and the intent for this to be added by way of variation at a later date. While acknowledging that the Council has limited resources available, in our initial submission, we advised it to be essential that the proposed chapter on ecosystems and Indigenous biodiversity is notified before hearings on other related parts of the district plan take place. This would enable the hearing panel to understand the Council's overall position, to ensure that the plan is internally consistent and integrated, and to ensure that the entire plan properly implements the purpose of the RMA and national and regional policy instruments on Indigenous biodiversity and the natural environment. Further, it would have facilitated the process for the Society to adequately comment and advise on potential environmental impacts within the proposed district plan. Forest and Bird's submission addressed many matters throughout the proposed plan, including seeking retention of provisions we support, seeking clarification of wording, and seeking amendments. All of our submissions were intended to ensure the plan provides for the presentation and protection of the natural character of the coastal environment, including the coastal marine area, wetlands, and lakes and rivers and their margins, the protection of outstanding natural features and landscapes, the protection of areas of significant Indigenous vegetation and significant habitats of Indigenous fauna, and maintenance and improvement of Indigenous biodiversity where it's not outstanding or significant. The Officer's Section 42A report recommends accepting many of the points raised in our submission, and in some cases, it is recommended that the points raised be declined. While we accept and agree with the Officer in some of these cases, we do not agree with them all. I will outline those points in more detail shortly. But before I do, the Section 42A Officer of the Earthworks chapter in paragraphs 112 to 118 has recommended, and I quote, that Royal Forest and Bird submission 289.7 176B deferred to the Natural Features and Landscapes chapter, and that the relief sought specific to the rules sought for earthworks within the coastal environment is discussed at the hearing. To assist this discussion, firstly, our submission sought that earthworks in the coastal environment should be a non-complying activity, or if any earthworks in the coastal environment were restricted discretionary activity, ensure that matters of discretion include natural character in the coastal environment. We also sought that non-notification clauses should not apply to these areas. The reasons we sought these changes were because, as notified, earthworks in the coastal environment would be a permitted activity if standards are met, and a restricted discretionary activity if they are not met. The Coastal Environmental Chapter relies on the other chapters in the plan to give effect to the objectives and policies of the Coastal Environment Chapter. Still, it needs to be clarified that this has occurred comprehensively. For example, the earthworks rules do not provide for specific management in the coastal environment and include various rules that do not apply differently within or outside the coastal environment. Earthworks in the coastal environment can have adverse effects on significant indigenous biodiversity and natural character. As a result, much more stringent controls are required than for activities outside the coastal environment because of sensitivity of coastal values and also because of the different higher order policy direction and purpose of the Act. Most activities will not be appropriate as permitted activities in the coastal environment. Notification clauses in Earthworks Rule 1 prevent public and limited notification of applications for earthworks concerns. Applications' adverse effects may cause adverse effects that warrant participation through notification. Instead of the coastal environment objectives and policies being appropriately given effect to in the Earthworks Rule framework, Forest and Birds position and relief sought remain the same. The chapter should include specific rules managing activities in the coastal environment. These rules should recognize that most activities will not be appropriate as permitted activities in the coastal environment. And notification of earthwork resource consent application in the coastal environment should be considered. I'm now moving to the points we disagree on. Submission point and provision for protection of indigenous biodiversity in general. Across the coastal environment, earthwork, natural features and landscapes and subdivision chapters, we sought references to the eco chapter to be inserted into the introduction text. We also sought more specific objectives, policies and rules for indigenous biodiversity given the coastal environment, earthworks, natural features and landscapes and subdivision chapters provisions manage indigenous biodiversity instead of an eco chapter. This was rejected, with officers citing the upcoming eco chapter as the most appropriate vehicle for these changes to occur. For example, in the subdivision section 42A, our relief was rejected, and I quote, due to the current lack of certainty regarding the contents of the eco-variation on page 25. This lack of certainty creates challenges in adequately protecting and safeguarding indigenous biodiversity from appropriate subdivisions, use and development. In our opinion, it is not appropriate to make decisions on subdivisions in the Napier district without looking at the bigger picture, and we therefore oppose this chapter. In the natural features and landscape chapter, our relief was rejected because, and I quote, any overlaps between provisions relating to biodiversity and those relating to the NFL will be addressed at the time of variation. While we understand that the absence of the indigenous biodiversity variation poses significant challenges to determine adequate protection measures for those assets, the following interim decision from the officer does not clarify what rules will be developed to prevent adverse impacts on biodiversity. As a result of our submission points being rejected and the eco chapter not yet being notified, we feel the Council has not provided adequate protection for indigenous biodiversity. We seek the further relief. We insert references to the eco chapter as per our submission into the coastal environment, earthworks, natural features and landscapes and subdivision chapters. Ensure that the issues in each chapter cover indigenous biodiversity. Ensure objectives and policies in each chapter cover indigenous biodiversity. Ensure rules in each chapter cover indigenous biodiversity, recognizing that in most cases, permitted and control activities in these chapters will not be appropriate to protect, preserve, maintain, and enhance indigenous biodiversity. Our submission contains proposed changes to achieve the relief sought. In relation to earthworks and environmental interests, we believe that the term necessary on page 18.60 is too broad and will potentially allow inappropriate earthworks depending on what interested parties deem necessary. So as a relief sought, use where appropriate in the term where appropriate in objectives, policies and rules instead of the word necessary as per our submission. Natural features and landscapes. We appreciate the officer's support to provide a higher level of protection by making earthworks and outstanding natural features non-complying due to their sensitivity, page 29. While the officer correctly refers to Section 6 of the RMA, it is incorrect to suggest that special character landscapes and special character features require a lower level of protection. Specifically, there's a contradiction between this support and comments made in paragraph 88 in response to our submission 289.83 on page 30, and I quote, "I support including specific references to special character landscapes and special character features that are located within the coastal environment to better align with the NZCPS, and this strengthens the protection of these areas. As a relief thought, please include a higher level of protection for SCLs and SCFs in the rule framework." I'm now coming to the notification clauses. Our submission sought for notification clauses to be removed in the earthworks and natural features and landscapes chapter. This is because an activity not meeting the permitted standards could cause adverse effects such that public participation is warranted. This point has been rejected by officers in both sections of the sections 42A. Forest and Bird maintain that notification preclusions are not appropriate. As a relief sought, remove notification preclusions as per our submission. In some instances, public participation may be warranted, and sections 95A and 95B are the most appropriate method for determining this rather than a blanket preclusion, and we want to see that the local communities are still able to have a say in these matters. On behalf of our local branch and the society, we thank Napier City Council for the opportunity to speak today. We appreciate and anticipate the notification of the chapter variations and look forward to providing further thought in the upcoming hearing streams. And we wish you all the best in your deliberations. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Just for your knowledge, you're aware that the eco variation has been notified just recently?
No, I wasn't aware.
I think submissions close end of January. So I think we'll be issuing a minute to address how the integration process is proposed to occur to ensure that. So we'll be hearing submissions on that variation as well as part of the district planning, the whole district plan process. So we'll be making sure there's a full integration with all the provisions of the plan. So just to let you know that that's happening for that. Just a question for me for a start. The earthworks, you say that most permitted earthworks might have some effects. I'm just trying to find it. Most activities will not be appropriate as permitted activities in the coastal environment. Did you haven't seen the evidence from Hawke's Bay Regional Council on this topic, because they did want to impose a slightly tighter control on earthworks in the coastal environment as well, and their proposal is for sort of non-mechanical kind of earthworks within limits. So if you could look at that, that would be good. But just the question, I suppose, is you say most activities, but by saying that, are you accepting there are some activities that might be appropriate as permitted?
Yeah.
Could you tell us what you think they might be?
Well, under Policy 6 of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, obviously activities that have a functional need to be located in the coastal marine area need to be provided for. Yeah, we understand these activities still need to go ahead. But there are also activities that won't have a functional to be in a specific location, and I think it's a bit tricky to determine whether it is functionally needed or not, and it's probably depends on the interested party involved and the developers whether they deem it necessary to be in the part of the coastal environment. But a permitted activity or a necessary activity would be if we look at wind farms and these kind of things, but it shouldn't be clashing with the protection of Indigenous biodiversity. So there are areas that are outstanding and they shouldn't be touched. Whereas, there should be another location that would be probably better. So it's about where to do it and where not to do it, if that makes sense.
Okay. I wouldn't mind, it might assist if you review the presentation from the Regional Council from yesterday. It's up online from Dal Meredith and her proposal in terms of amending that rule around permitted earthworks in the coastal environment. And getting us your feedback, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions from the panel?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question of staff. Actually, thank you very much for the presentation and the further submission. Just in regards to the inconsistency with the SCLs and the SCFs and your officer's recommendation there, are you able just to clarify that for me around that higher level of protection?
Yeah, the reason I didn't perceive it as inconsistent because the activities that we were protecting or the purpose we were protecting against, I perceived them as different. So the Section 6 addresses outstanding natural features and landscapes, and so that's why I said I think it's appropriate for that to have a non-complying status for earthworks, whereas the second comment is made where it's a permitted, earthworks is permitted in those areas as long as it's not within the coastal environment. And so I did see that because these special character landscapes are the values are very local rather than at the national Section 6 level, where as long as they're not in the coastal environment, I did think that the permitted threshold that we had was still appropriate because, excuse me, when that's not reached, then it moves to a restricted discretionary. So that was intentional, but I can see how it could be considered inconsistent. But yeah, I did see them as different values that were being protected. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantal, for your presentation and for the submission. I've really just got probably it's a more general question, comment, observation that's been weighing on my mind a bit. You talk in the section around Indigenous biodiversity about obviously ensuring that the provisions within the district plan are appropriate to protect, preserve, maintain and enhance. Section 31 of the RMA, which is the functions of territorial authorities, specifically gives territorial authorities responsibility for the control and use of land for the maintenance of Indigenous biodiversity, but not the others. It doesn't include those. So I just really want to get a sense of how you see the overall context of Indigenous biodiversity among all the responsible agencies, and where you see the territorial authorities and their rules being able to fit in with that.
Oh, that's a very complex question. Probably
Yeah,
have
sorry,
to
mate. Look,
come back to you on that.
Or maybe just respond to the Section 31, which is around the RMA, which is around the maintenance of Indigenous biodiversity, and that's clearly TAs are given the responsibility for that. But I just sort of see this whole broadening. It then obviously has implications for particularly the rules in district plans. We have to protect, preserve, and enhance as well. Thanks.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. So that's I need to dig a little bit deeper, but I discussed this with my planner and to see what she has to say about that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't have any further questions. So thank you very much for your presentation this morning, Dr. Bijou. We'll take that aboard. And as I said, if you could respond to the Regional Council suggestions around that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next submitter is in person from Mana Ahuriri Holdings, who's not here yet. 5 minutes away? Okay, we'll adjourn the hearing for 5 minutes. Hearing stream 2 has reconvened for our last submitter for this particular hearing stream. Welcome back, Mr. Stickney.
Thank you.
Here for Mana Ahuriri Trust. We've read your pre-circulated evidence.
Great.
And just for the record, we have received to that legal opinion from James Winchester.
Correct.
Which has been put online now. It's under the hearing stream 2 collection. But it was raised in response to questions at hearing stream 1, as you are
Correct.
aware. Now, the panel for hearing stream 1 hasn't yet had a chance to consider that opinion and all the sort of scope issues that it addresses. So we'll put that on as a placeholder for when we can get together and talk about it and things. But putting that on the table and to one side, we're here to hear your evidence and ask questions on your evidence for hearing stream 2. Can I just to clarify, your suite of track changes
Yes.
at the end of your evidence, everything in red is your track changes?
Correct.
Right.
And that was based on the notified version of the plan. And now I see with the 42A report, there's been some significant changes recommended, many of which the submitter's fully endorsing. Right at the start, we'll make the offer that we're happy to work further with council if there's some consolidation and refinement in merging those together based on the latest recommendations. More than happy to provide a more integrated document if that would help in further deliberations.
Okay, thank you for that offer. We appreciate it. So if you wouldn't mind just talking to the main points of your submission.
Sure. Okay. Look, I'm going to keep this reasonably concise today because I know there's been a huge number of submissions on subdivision, and I'm sure you have heard or will hear on very similar issues from other submitters, including the likes of Kāinga Ora, etc. My name, qualifications, etc. were outlined in hearing stream 1. And as you know, I've worked with both Mana Ahuriri Trust and Mana Ahuriri Holdings Limited Partnership, which is the property commercial arm, to prepare submissions on the PDP. Subdivision is an important aspect for Mana Ahuriri, and that's in respect of the significant land holdings that were or have been acquired or are about to be acquired through the redress process. The scale of those sites varies, but a lot of them are large strategic land holdings within Napier urban area. And so for Mana Ahuriri to realise their development aspirations, there's going to be a need for provisions that can be tailored for a variety of scenarios, be it super lots and other parent titles being carved off larger sites to enable further investment by other parties, or subdivision provisions which reflect those urban development aspirations in terms of medium density development on identified sites. And obviously the benefit of having a parcel of land created sometimes earlier on gives certainty of investment from other parties or other related iwi entities to be able to obtain funding for subsequent development. So the context of this is very important. I do acknowledge the significant extent of changes recommended to the subdivision chapter by Connie Mills, and those changes were made in response to submissions from ourselves along with other parties, including Kāinga Ora. Those changes on the whole, I believe, will improve the legibility and flow of the plan provisions. So I do have just a number of residual matters to cover off, as I say, but I'm sure you'll hear or have heard about these previously. In respect of rule sub R2B, the activity status of the rule remaining as discretionary rather than just cascading to an RD status from the starting point of control, I see is still in the recommended version of provisions. Given that the standards are relatively confined in respect of the triggers for non-compliance, I do believe an RD status is not unreasonable, but with appropriate criteria to target those matters of concern. And I think that would actually enable council to focus more clearly on those salient matters rather than looking at a full discretionary activity status to be considered. In respect of sub S12, and I know there's been submissions made on this by Kāinga Ora, the adoption of a sliding scale for vacant sites is one I consider should be addressed and investigated further. And as I said, I note Kāinga Ora has also made submissions in this regard, drawing on the unitary plan in Auckland as an example of the sliding scale for minimum lot sizes. I don't see any compelling reason as to why the vacant site size provisions can't reflect a graduation of densities within the zone and the desired land use outcomes for that zone, with the possible exception of the high density residential zone. In hindsight, and perhaps because the subdivision provisions, the land use provisions have yet to be heard, and zoning provisions, obviously there's a lot of submission points in that regard. Perhaps it hasn't helped by hearing the subdivision chapter now, when I think ideally the land use matters could have been heard earlier. That would perhaps enable an easier run to consider subdivision changes in terms of reflecting the land use outcomes that were required. But I'll just put that on the table. So Mana Ahuriri have a significant land holding at Whararangi, which is proposed to be zoned to medium density residential. And while some of that development will be completed in more of a super lot integrated comprehensive development subdivision at the same time, there is potentially the option, and it should be made available, that packages could be subdivided off and on-sold to other housing providers to enable further investment. And on that basis, we've looked at, in the office, we've looked at typologies, etc., primarily two-storey, and believe that 250 square metres net site area for the medium residential zone could actually be, or is a feasible option instead of the 350 that's currently applied. I note that the development area provisions have now kicked in as a recommended change to those minimum site sizes. So Whararangi would be ruled out in terms of the development area provisions would mean there's no minimum lot size required. So that's a positive outcome. But there are other zones such as the mixed use zone where I think the site size, scale and graduation could be revisited, and we're happy to work with council on that. Just the last real point that I wanted to draw your attention to, and it may be something that I need some clarification on from the council officers on this, is rule sub S6. Now that says that no more than, in the residential zone, no more than 3 sites may be created. And then my understanding is that the activity status defaults to, or jumps down to restricted discretionary. I'm not quite clear as to the intent of that provision and whether that's something that's been carried over from the operative plan. I cannot understand the planning rationale for a trigger at 3 additional lots within a residential zone. As I said, it's not uncommon for lots to be subdivided and then packaged up for on-sale to a developer or builder. So I don't know whether I need clarity, I think, or we'd appreciate some clarity on what the effects are actually that we are trying to manage through having a threshold of three lots, and whether that relates just to vacant site subdivision. I'm not quite sure. Perhaps some further investigation of that would be appropriate. That's particularly given the fact that the economies of scale now with development are such that 3 lots to develop as a package is financially very challenging to make work. So a larger number of sites would be required at the outset for a designer to then work with. So the rule, as it's currently drafted, does appear to float in terms of the environmental effects that it's seeking to address, and I haven't been able to find any substantive assessment for that rule in the Section 32 analysis. So I would really appreciate some guidance, possibly back from the council officers, on the intent of that rule. So in summary, and I think the balance of the submission and the evidence is relatively self-explanatory, I do want to pass on the acknowledgement of Mana Ahuriri to the council officers and the substantial number of changes that have been recommended to the subdivision chapter. And we're certainly amenable to working further with council officers on the provisions if we're looking at matters of refinement, or possibly where we still have some divergence, but we can work together before recommendations are put back to the panel. Thank you. That's all I have today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stickney. Just as an observation, it's not unusual for a plan to have a trigger point for sort of larger numbers of subdivision to sort of open up some more wider design issues and impact issues for multiple lot developments. But I will turn to Connie and just sort of get a sort of immediate response, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did recommend in the 42 report that sub S6 be deleted as well. The reason for that is the purpose of sub S6 was the good urban design outcomes, and we figured that if we can bring into the assessment criteria the urban design guideline for Napier, that's a more efficient way of managing it, and we don't have that.
Cut off.
Yeah, that arbitrary in a way, but it brings it more to the overall design. So yeah,
Okay.
recommended for deletion.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sorry, I'm just looking at Appendix A.
I made an error.
Okay, that would explain it. Thank you.
Okay.
That was concisely wrapped up. Thank you very much.
We'll probably be seeking a more considered response from Ms Mills,
Yeah.
part of her reply on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for Mr Signey?
No, I'm very clear. Thank you, John.
Thanks very much. I've just got one question. It's regard to your track changes. And I'm just curious, really, why you subdivision, sub I7, issues of reverse sensitivity on adjacent land uses. I'm just curious why you deleted nearly the whole issue description, or suggested that it be deleted.
Just let me.
Sorry, it's
find
on
that.
page. I don't have a page
3 of
number.
30
Sorry.
on the bottom,
Yeah.
the one, issues.
Yep.
Oh, yep. Here we go. Yep. Look, I think the effects for the explanation there is quite lengthy in terms of the issue. So I think it's a case-by-case basis for mitigation measures. It should be fairly obvious if the planner's doing his job or her job in terms of assessing what the surrounding context and the surrounding environment, what would need to be done. So, look, I think it's just a case of very clearly setting it's an issue and setting out what ideally council would like to see, rather than perhaps more of a narrative on that. If some of that was recommended to go back in, that would be fine, but I think it was more, let's cut to the chase on this issue, and if you're doing your assessment, it'll be pretty clear what you need to do.
Thank you. It's probably more like Cinderella. It'll be somewhere in the middle, won't it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and I was going to ask the same question, because you need to describe the issue rather than get straight to the mitigation
Yeah.
of that issue. So,
Yeah.
yes, the Cinderella solution probably is the best way. And I've got a similar question in relation to sub P9, where you're recommending deleting the final clause of that.
Yeah.
I think I can understand why you're suggesting deleting it, but
Yeah.
better from yourself. Top of page, I
Yes.
can hardly read this, 8 of 30.
Yes, 8 of 30. So effectively, that's covered off, in my opinion, covered off in A and C, in terms of coordinated, integrated and compatible with the existing infrastructure network. You could then just add those 3 waters provisions to C, rather than delete, and add those in, and that would cover the issues I believe need to be addressed there.
Just check, see if there's any other questions. Oh, yeah, and in terms of sub S4, standard S4, the minimum allotment size is the special purposes zone. Could you just explain your reasoning for changing that? So you're suggesting shifting special purpose zone to Whanganui Orotu, stormwater and ecology into the no minimum thing.
Yep.
I know you touched upon this on your summary just before, but could you just explain rationale for that?
Sure. Just if you wouldn't mind giving me a minute.
Okay.
Thank you. Just let me refer back. Just try and find my previous document. Here we go. So effectively, that was in terms of all those other zones, the same issues in respect of subdivision were considered applicable, and so it was really merging those same issues into that special purpose zone as well. Does that help?
Okay, it's just in relation to, it's in concern to stormwater and ecology,
Yes.
and why before it was 100 hectare minimum, and you're suggesting no minimum hectare. What's the rationale?
Well, it really depends what activities are going to be within that particular overlay. So maybe certain pieces of infrastructure or certain installations and other things where a separate lot may be required. Could be for a conservation purpose within that area. And so really it's tailored to what is the land area required to effectively contain that particular piece of infrastructure within the zone or particular item. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions from Mr. Stickler? Okay, well, thank you very much for attending today and
Thanks, Bonnie.
looking to your evidence.
Thank you very much. I don't think I'll see you again until about June.
Good summer then.
Yeah, I'll be looking a bit whiter by then in terms of, getting the sun at the moment. Thank you very much. Just quickly before we close Fleur, Lincoln and I have had the odd discussion about the Papakainga chapters with Cherry-L, but quite high level. Fleur, I think we're keen just to, again on behalf of Mana, I think there's a desire to, if we can, any issues outstanding, we can work through those very quickly as well. So I know you're really busy at the moment, but that's still on the table. All right, thank you. Great, thanks for your time.
So with Mr. Stickney being the last submitter for hearing stream 2 we will, during this particular hearing, we will be issuing a minute, as I said earlier, in regard to matters we're looking for further information on, just to assist everyone. And as I said, the whole question of integration is looming large. It's come up a lot during this hearing, as you probably heard earlier as well. So we'll be issuing a minute just to outline the process for integration across the plan. Now, we've got one variation now notified, and there will be a couple of others coming.
Yep.
And the idea is for all of them to be heard together and to provide integrated recommendations right at the very end of the whole process.
That will be very helpful.
So in a nutshell, that's what's going to.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
There being the procedural matters to flag, we'll adjourn the hearing. And thank you very much to everybody attending. And it's been a pleasure to work with everyone. So thank you.